He was the best striker in the world, and he almost missed the entire tournament. That is the contradiction at the heart of Euro 1988. Not the goal, though we will get to the goal, but the man behind it. A man whose body was already betraying him, who sat on the bench for the opening match, who smoked cigarettes behind the training ground to kill the frustration, and who then produced the most breathtaking moment in the history of international football. This is the story of Marco van Basten at Euro 1988. And it is really a story about time, about what happens when greatness knows it is running out, about what a player does when he understands, somewhere deep and unspoken, that the clock is already ticking. Before we talk about Munich, before we talk about that volley, we need to go back 1 year. Van Basten had just signed for AC Milan. Silvio Berlusconi had paid a fee that Johan Cruyff, his mentor at Ajax, considered an insult, but Van Basten was ready. He had scored 128 goals in 133 league appearances for Ajax. He had won 4 consecutive Eredivisie top scorer titles. He had scored the winner in the 1987 UEFA Cup Winners' Cup final against Lokomotiv Leipzig with a powerful near-post header. He was, by any measure, the most complete striker in Europe. Then his ankle gave way. He played just 11 matches in his entire debut Serie A season. 11. A player built for domination, reduced to watching from the stands, watching Milan win the Scudetto without him. When Rinus Michels named his squad for Euro 1988, Van Basten was included, but he was not the plan. He was handed the number 12 shirt, the substitute. Wim Kieft, who had just top scored in the Eredivisie for PSV, and Johnny Bosman were ahead of him in the pecking order. Van Basten, the best striker in the world, was third choice. That is not a metaphor. That is what actually happened. He sought advice from Cruyff during a private training session back in Amsterdam. Cruyff, never one for sentiment, told him to walk away from the tournament entirely. Van Basten did not listen. Instead, he stayed in camp, hid from the coaching staff, and smoked cigarettes while waiting for his moment. That detail matters. It tells you everything about the tension inside him, the frustration of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of, forced to wait while others played in his position. The Netherlands lost their opening game 1-0 to the Soviet Union. Valery Lobanovsky had built a machine. He had selected 11 players from his own Dynamo Kiev squad, men who had trained together for years under a system that treated football as a science, that measured performance in data and reduced the game to repeatable patterns. Vasily Ratz scored early in the second half, and Lobanovsky packed his midfield, forcing the Dutch long and cutting off every passing lane. Van Basten came on as a substitute and hit the woodwork with a late header. It was not enough, but it was enough for Michels. Van Basten was in the starting 11 for the next game. That next game was against England, and it was the moment the tournament changed. England were one of the favourites. Bobby Robson's side had reached the quarter-finals of the 1986 World Cup in Mexico. They were not a team you dismantled easily. Van Basten dismantled them. He scored 3 goals. The first was a piece of pure craft, controlling a gullet cross, executing a Cruyff turn, and guiding the ball past Peter Shilton with the kind of composure that makes you forget how difficult it actually was. The second was a precision strike from the left into the far corner. The third was a close-range finish after a flick-on from a corner. 3 goals, 3 completely different types of finish. A hat-trick that announced without any ambiguity that this tournament now belonged to him. In his own words, from that moment, everything changed and everything went positive. He had spent a year broken, watching from the sidelines, wondering if his body would ever cooperate again. Now he was whole. Now he was unstoppable. The player who had been handed the number 12 shirt was now the only number that mattered. England went home, the Dutch went forward, and Van Basten went from passenger to protagonist in the space of 90 minutes. The semi-final against West Germany carried a weight that went beyond football. In 1974, the Netherlands had played the greatest football the World Cup had ever seen, and they had lost the final to West Germany on home soil. Rinus Michels had coached that side. He was coaching this one too. Goalkeeper Hans van Breukelen had watched the 1974 final as a 17-year-old and later said it was one of his motivations never to lose to Germany again. The whole squad carried that memory. It was not just a semi-final, it was a reckoning. The game in Hamburg was tight, physical, and decided by a single moment of Van Basten brilliance. With the score level at 1-1 and extra time approaching, Jan Maas. Wouters found space and threaded a pass through. Van Basten stretched, got there before Jurgen Kohler, and steered the ball past Eike Immel into the far corner. The Dutch were in the final. 14 years of hurt, settled in one touch. And then came Munich. June 25th, 1988. The final. The Netherlands against the Soviet Union, the same opponents who had beaten them in the group stage, the same Lobanovsky system, the same collective discipline, the same 11 men from Dynamo Kiev. But this was a different Dutch team now. This was a team that had found its confidence, that had stopped being afraid of losing and started believing it could win. Ruud Gullit headed the Dutch in front in the 32nd minute, meeting a Van Basten cross at the far post. 1-0. The Soviet Union pushed forward. The game was open. And then, in the second half, Arnold Mühren, playing his last ever international match, received the ball wide on the left and sent a high, looping cross into the penalty area. What happened next defies rational explanation. Van Basten was near the edge of the box at an angle so acute that the geometry of the situation made a shot almost impossible. 3 Soviet defenders stood between him and the goal. Goalkeeper Rinat Dasayev was positioned to cover the near post. Every coaching manual ever written would tell you to control the ball, hold it up, wait for support. Van Basten did none of that. He struck it first time on the volley with his right foot from an angle that should not produce a goal. The ball cleared Dasayev and dipped into the far corner of the net. Rinus Michels rose from the bench and put his hand to his head in disbelief. The stadium fell into a kind of stunned silence before erupting. Van Basten himself looked confused. In his own words, "I did not really understand it, and what I did." You can also see that in my reaction, I am asking, what is happening? What was happening was the greatest goal ever scored in a major final, not the most powerful, not the most technically rehearsed, the most impossible. The kind of goal that makes you question the relationship between intention and outcome, between skill and luck, between a player and the precise moment he was born for. Van Basten himself admitted he needed luck. He said you need so much luck with a shot like that, and at that moment, it was given to him. That honesty is part of what makes the goal so extraordinary. He did not pretend it was calculated. He knew it was the intersection of ability and fortune, and he was grateful for it. The Netherlands won 2-0. Their first and, to this day, only major international trophy. Van Basten won the Golden Boot with 5 goals in the tournament. He won the Ballon d'Or that same year. He was 23 years old, and the world assumed it was only the beginning. But here is what the celebration obscures. The ankle that had failed him in Milan did not get better. It got worse. He would go on to win 3 Ballon d'Or awards, 3 Serie A titles, and 2 European Cups with Milan. He was, for a period in the early 1990s, arguably the greatest player on the planet. And then the ankle took everything. His last competitive match was in 1993. He was 28 years old. He spent 2 more years attempting comebacks, undergoing surgeries, willing a body that had already given its answer. In 1995, he announced his retirement. The greatest striker of his generation, finished at an age when most players are approaching their peak. Sky Sports would later rank him first on their list of great athletes whose careers were cut short. That is the measure of what was lost. Not just goals, not just trophies, an entire second act that the world never got to see. A career that should have run until the late 1990s ended before it reached 30. The ankle that started failing in 1987 never truly healed. It just kept taking more and more away from him. That volley in Munich was not just the greatest moment of his career. It was the beginning of the end of it. The body that produced that impossible strike was already counting down. Every tournament, every season, every goal was borrowed time. That is what makes Euro 1988 so devastating to revisit. You are not just watching a great player at his best, you are watching a great player at the precise moment before everything starts to fall apart. The frustration of the bench, the release of the hat-trick, the pure geometry of that volley. It all makes sense when you understand what came after. Greatness compressed into a single summer because the summers were running out. That is what greatness looks like when it is running out of time. It looks like a volley from an impossible angle in a final in Munich in 1988. Now you made it here, you deserve more. We have another story on screen right now that deserves exactly the same attention.